Welcome to The Hidden Human, the podcast where we explore the stories behind the business leader. Get ready to hear insights from business leaders speaking candidly about how they became who they are today and the lessons they learned along the way. And now, here's your host, leadership coach and speaker, Kelly Meerbot.
Welcome to the space where we reveal our personal humanity to reconnect with our shared humanity. Let's begin our conversation with Leonard Brody. And Leonard, I will let you explain what your title is. And welcome to Hidden Human. We are so thrilled to have you here.
Yeah, thank you. I'm glad to have the opportunity. Appreciate you having me.
Yeah. So how would you give your, if you were going to explain to me in a way I could understand if I were a 6-year-old child, what it is that Leonard Brody does in this world, what is it?
Well, I'm predominantly an entrepreneur and venture capitalist. So I've spent the last sort of 30 years of my life building companies at the intersection between consumer technology and media.
Okay.
And today I run and co-founded a joint venture with CAA, with Creative Artists Agency in Los Angeles, that co-founds really science-backed consumer companies with the most iconic people in the world. And that's sort of what we do.
That's incredible. So how young were you when this itch to build businesses came? And usually what I find is it usually that defining moment happens between the ages of 8 and 14.
Yeah, that's probably right with me. I think, when I was young, entrepreneurship wasn't really accepted in the way that it is today. I'm 52. And so when I was in high school and even in graduate school and stuff, there really was no training or there was nothing interesting about being an entrepreneur. Like I was graduating law school in 1997. So just at the time when HTML was the surfable internet and Mosaic and browsers and stuff were starting to come out. So the grand era of entrepreneurship was still in those days kind of restricted to family businesses and franchising and stuff like that. But I had the good fortune in my family of having a couple people around me that were family members that had been entrepreneurs and been quite successful. And I just knew really young that the idea of kind of sticking at a job and doing that path every day was just not in my blood. It just wasn't for me. So I would say probably when I was 8 to 10 years old, I kind of knew that that's really the path that I wanted to spend most of my days on.
So what were the family businesses and who ran them when you were that young, 8 to 10? And I would say you're young at 52 as well. So, but 8 to 10, who was in your family and what business did they run?
So the one that was probably the most impactful on me was a cousin, actually. He was older, so we referred to him as an uncle, but his name was Israel Asper. And Izzy was really a force of nature as an entrepreneur. He had an illustrious career doing all kinds of things as a lawyer and as a politician, but he inevitably started what became Canada's largest media company, television broadcaster, daily newspapers across the country, radio, and then ended up being one of the largest television broadcasters in Australia, New Zealand, Ireland, Canada. And he was just an amazing person. And we had built a really nice relationship where we would, this is pre-internet. So we would write letters back and forth and I would see him at family events. And you got a real sense from him about the work that was required to do this and how much intensity and part of your life it had to take to be able to actually deliver on being an entrepreneur. But I registered more with him and what he did than family friends who became lawyers or people that ended up becoming dentists or doctors and stuff. That just for me was never in my blood. And I do think, having him around was always a good North Star to look and sort of see, what would Izzy do and how did he do it? He unfortunately passed away many years ago, far too young. But I still find myself thinking, what would Izzy do and how would he respond to this? And even in a day where it's such a different economy than it was before. But I would say Izzy was really the driver for me. And then I had lots of other people in my life that were uncles and cousins and stuff that all they were either lawyers, because I think back in that day, back when I was in my 20s, lawyers really were more prone to be entrepreneurs than were MBA grads. Because in those days, the MBA grads were going into management consulting and iBanking and stuff. They weren't really thinking of entrepreneurship, whereas a lot of the lawyers were. So a lot of our family that were lawyers ended up becoming entrepreneurial in some way or another, small businesses or otherwise. And so that's kind of what drove me into it.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And what did your mom and dad do?
So my father was a dentist,
Okay.
yeah, his dentist and retired. And my father and I are incredibly different
Mm-hmm.
in, I would say, work respect. I think what attracted being a dentist to my father was the idea that you could sort of be at a set schedule, have a lot of free time at the end of the day, own your life. It was a small, I guess when you're running a dental practice, it's a small business in some respects, but it's not. I think there's a big difference, by the way, between running a small business and being an entrepreneur. I think they're two very different things.
Yeah.
And happy to chat more about that. But my father did that. My mother was actually, I was actually raised by a single mother. My parents were divorced when I was quite young. And my mom was quite entrepreneurial in her own right, or at least wanted to be entrepreneurial. So she always had little businesses that she was trying on the side, because I think in those days it was quite hard for a single mother to gain full-time work.
Mm-hmm.
You're talking in the late 70s, early 80s. And I think it was much more difficult for her to find gainful full-time employment than it would be if she just did her own thing. So she had a food delivery business where she would bake baked goods, probably illegally at home, and she would sell them to stores. She was a wholesaler for that kind of stuff. And then she had a couple of restaurants that she started that sort of began the process of her end up wholesaling, but she had like a baking business, and then she became a cookbook entrepreneur and has 10 best-selling cookbooks. But I think for her, she probably had it in her blood as well, but circumstances drove her into being an entrepreneur because I think it was just easier at that point, ironically.
Sure. And what qualities do you think you get from your mom? What do you get from your dad that you leverage in your work today?
My mom, look, my mom, my mom is a bit of a firecracker. And so she had, in some respects, had her own struggles with mental illness and other things that made it difficult for her. But my mother is incredibly resourceful. And I would say that that's probably one of the most important skill sets for being an entrepreneur, is understanding how to be resourceful. Like in a business context, understanding that no doesn't always mean no, and understanding how to work around corners, and understanding how to get to a result you need in multiple different ways.
Sure.
My mother was very, very good at that.
Mm-hmm.
And she was also a good salesperson. She knew how to trigger in people a response that she wanted. Mm-hmm. And I think those were skill sets, that the resourcefulness and that ability to sell were things that I really got from my mom. My dad is much more tempered, much more even keeled. Mm-hmm. And so I think I'm much more even keeled than my mother, for sure.
Okay.
But I would say from him, that even keeled kind of personality was something that was a good balance against what I learned, because I spent most of my time with my mother. Yeah. And so, behaviorally, you tend to adopt more of that when you spend more time with someone like that. Right. And so I think he helped balance that out. And my dad was more logical and rational than my mom. So it kind of balanced that out a little bit. Right. And I think also, my dad sort of changed his career path a little bit later in life in how he wanted to practice dentistry. And it was a good lesson that, you can really, you have multiple chapters in your life. And to your point, while 50 may feel old, in fact, it's really just the beginning. It's certainly for entrepreneurs, I would argue that's your prime. Your prime is when you're really in your late 40s to 60s, is when you're really going to drive the vast majority of the energy and the revenue and the experience to be able to build something that's significant.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. What was your first job? And I'm not talking about after law school. What was your very first job?
So because I was raised by a single mother, I worked very young, because my mother actually needed the income. So I worked not because it went to me and I was buying stuff. It actually went to my mother. It went to the family, which was kind of like 1930s, kind of living like you were in 1930. But so my very first job, actually, I was 11 years old, and we sold donuts door to door for a company called the Little Devil Donut Company. And you basically got dressed up as like a little devil. And I think they were like day-old donuts from a bakery. And this bakery just basically tried to figure out a clever way to sell donuts door to door that were probably day-old donuts.
Yeah.
And so I would go door to door and sell these bags of donuts to people as part of Little Devil Donuts. Yeah. And so that was kind of my first job, because that was the only thing you could do. It was more lucrative than a paper route, because in those days at 11, that's all you could do.
Right.
And then in Alberta, where I grew up in Canada, you could start working when you were 12. And so which seems crazy now, but
I know, I was just thinking.
Yeah. So when I was 12, I did that from when I was 10 and 11. And then when I was 12, I started working as a busboy at a restaurant. Gotcha. So I was bussing tables at the age of 12. Like, I had started working pretty much as a part of my regular routine since I was 10 years old.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, for me, it was 8. And you know, I had the good fortune that the money was not going to my family, but you know, it was the value of $1 that my parents really instilled in me. But I always find that the most successful entrepreneurs have done a stint in hospitality or the restaurant industry, because they have that ability to pivot and innovate. Do you agree with that? And if so, or if not, tell me why.
No, I do think I think whether it's food service or hospitality or sales, I mean, I think all of those kind of teach you the importance of human interaction and human relationships. Sure. And the most important skill set for an entrepreneur, I mean, listen, entrepreneurship now is much more specialized, and it's much more of a machine than it used to be, you know, back in the day. But I think the greatest skill you're going to have is persuasion. I mean, you cannot be an entrepreneur. It doesn't matter how resourceful you are. It doesn't matter how great the idea is or how transformational it is. If you're not able to persuade, you're just, you know, it's like having a car without an engine in it. It just doesn't work. And so I think when you work in hospitality or retail, for that matter, either or, it trains you to persuade. It trains you to understand how to convince people that either this is the right choice, or how to get better tips, or how to sell this product. And that I think was probably the most valuable thing for me. Was, you know, my mom had a gift for that already. And I would say, if I really looked honestly at myself, it's probably my only skill set, is that I can take things that are complex and make them simple and persuade people to do things. I would say those are my 2 superpowers. And the rest of it, I need partners to help with, because, you know, there's a million other skills that I'm shitty at that I can't do, and I need someone to help with. And so, I think that's where that comes from. I think when you work at a young age and you're in the service industry of some kind, you learn the art of persuasion, because if you don't, you fail.
Right. And I mean, I had the door-to-door experience, you know, selling raffle tickets for our church. And I think that is a great experience as well, because, you know, you learn rejection and resilience in real time. But, you know, one of your businesses really fascinates me, because my background, I spent 10 years in corporate media, 11 years, 98 to 2009. And you have a business called Now Public, which is fascinating to me, because it involves citizen journalism, right? Why are you passionate about citizens and being able to be part of the media? I mean, I know from my perspective, but I'm really interested in hearing what you have to say about that.
So I should clarify, we sold that business about 10 years ago.
Okay.
So that business was exited. We sold it.
Okay.
but it doesn't take away from why I was interested and my partners were interested in doing it. So as I mentioned, my family was in the media business. My uncle was really probably one of the most significant media moguls in Canada and the Commonwealth. And I got interested in it because, when you talk to him, he was a tax lawyer first.
Mm-hmm.
And then he ended up becoming a politician, and he ran the Liberal Party in Manitoba, which is a province in Canada. And he was the leader of the opposition. And he sort of had this epiphany when he was sitting in government, which is that, in fact, it's not really government that has the power, it's really media. And if you can effectively have a media voice, you have a lot more influence and persuasion. It's the ultimate tool for persuasion.
Right.
And I think I got interested in it from that perspective. And I also felt like as the medium of the internet was changing how we consumed and created, there was going to be a model where traditional we specialized in breaking news, by the way. That was mostly our area. And so we created a funnel by which, if God forbid you and I witnessed an earthquake or a shooting or something, a positive news event, you and I were the likely people that were going to be breaking that footage. And there had to be a way to be able to standardize that and scrub it and get it into traditional media so that, because we're going to be where reporters can't be. And that was the original premise for Now Public. And we were really one of the first companies in the world to commercialize the concept of citizen journalism. And I think, I'm not sure if this is still true, but certainly at the time, we were the only source of non-unionized reporting into the Associated Press.
Wow, so, that's amazing.
Yeah, we were pretty pioneering in what we did. And we ended up selling the company to the Anschutz Group in Los Angeles about 10 years ago. And then I stayed on an earn-out capacity with the Anschutz Group for a period of time, running innovation and that kind of stuff. So that's why I was interested in it. I think it's more true today than it ever was before. I mean, you can look at how media is creating incredible divisiveness in the way we vote, the way we think about political extremes, misinformation, and all of the divides that are being caused now between human beings that weren't before. And the same with how you treat social media. I mean, social media is the ultimate fragmentation of that. So I'm still super interested in it, and what I do today is very tied to it. But yeah, we sold that company.
Yeah, I did see that. And I was just, as I was doing my research on you, I was wondering if you wished you still had it to influence the kind of information that the public is getting because of all the reasons you just expounded on. Yeah,
I mean, I think media is not a great business, unfortunately.
No, it's not. It's not.
But it's a great business adjacent to selling things. So if you happen to have products and services that you're selling, having a media engine bolted onto that is very valuable. So I think from a pure business perspective, probably not really, but from an altruistic perspective, having the ability to do that again, more set up as a foundation or something that was actually done as a not-for-profit, I think would be very compelling. And there's lots of people now that are trying it and playing around with it. Like some of the original Instagram founders just started a new company called Artifact, which is trying to grade the quality of both what you're reading, but also where it was referenced from and sources and stuff like that. It's a pretty uphill battle. The internet has created the ultimate form of human laziness. And out of that, when you're on information overload, there's only so much time you're willing to put into deciphering the truth. And I think that's right now the most important skill set you can have, both as an entrepreneur and probably a human alive today, is critical thinking skills, the ability to understand how to think critically. And so I wouldn't want to do it as a business, but I think I could definitely see myself getting back into it from a foundation perspective and a not-for-profit perspective, for sure.
Yeah, I agree with you 100%. I mean, after being in the media, and seeing both sides and seeing, I will tell you, Leonard, the first news director I had told me that I needed to remember the 2 R's, ratings and revenue. And I will never, ever forget that. And when he told me that, I thought, this is not the business for me. So,
Right,
um,
right.
but on another thread, one of my passions as an executive coach is really talking about resilience and how it's the number one leadership superpower. I know you focused on the importance of bouncing back. Why do you think that matters so much to future growth?
Look, I think that when you think about people that are successful, so one of the things that I don't like about internet culture today is, just as it's amplified media, it is amplified the old snake oil salesman from the county fair by a factor of 20 million. And so everybody and their brother is claiming that they've solved, how do you solve mental illness? How do you become a better person? I've got the secret and answer for this. I mean, there are so many deceivers online that it's almost unbearable. It's unbearable to watch and listen to all these people that are false prophets. And I think that in and of itself is probably one of the biggest challenges right now that civilization is facing, is you have an onslaught of people who are horrible false prophets that are claiming to be experts in fields that they're not, and claiming to give advice. And everybody now has a megaphone that they can just blather out their opinions.
Right.
And it creates a very dangerous situation, in my view, where truth becomes quite muddled. And people's ability people who really need help and really need experts are not getting to the help that they need. And so when I look at, when I think about resilience as an example, resilience is the core DNA difference between people that are successful and people that are not. Success being defined as internal happiness, because success means many different things to many different people. Some people are motivated by money. Some people see success as their impact on other people. Some see success as, I got 4 million likes on a post today, and that's success to them. I mean, however you define it, without resilience, you don't get there. And I think unfortunately, it's an overused term that has become a little bit void for vagueness. Not a lot of people really understand what it means, but my better half will ask me all the time, did you have a good day today? And if you're actually out in the world swinging, and you're actually out in the world as an entrepreneur, I should say, and this is maybe true, this is probably true for non-entrepreneurs as well, but there's no such thing for me as a good day or a bad day. They don't exist, because at any given day, I'm dealing with 5 dumpster fires, 5 amazing things, and the day is either net neutral or net negative, net positive. There's no such thing as like, it was an unbelievable day and everything went well. For every good thing, some massive shit mess just happened that I had to deal with 2 minutes before. That's just, brain curdling, boring, or bad, or, and so I think for me, resilience is the skill set that's required to handle the inevitability of negativity and the inevitability of problems, and being able to bounce. It goes back to what I was saying before about resourcefulness. Those 2 things are connected. Resiliency and resourcefulness are very connected, because you can easily be resilient but not have the resourcefulness to be able to work around problems.
Exactly.
And to me, those are 2 gears of the same plane that you're trying to land. And I think that's where it matters. I think you have to be able, in order to be successful, meaning internally happy, you have to be able to navigate and manage the inevitable dumpster fires that are coming your way. And I believe wholeheartedly that the rise in mental wellness issues and the rise in mental illness
Mhm.
particularly what I would call the lower spectrum, and things like depression and
Mhm.
anxiety. I think a lot of that has come from a societal loss of resilience and the
I agree.
ability. And listen, I have no science or data to back that up, but my inclination is that the ultimate form of resiliency, which also would result in a lowered EQ, so that I'm not
Mhm.
saying it's all positive.
Right.
Look at my grandparents or our grandparents' generation. They lived in the confines of war and in the
Mhm.
confines of rationing. They did
Yeah.
not live in a world of abundance.
No,
And,
they do not.
and in a world where you are surviving sometimes two world wars, let alone one, and you're not in a world that's abundant, your ability to be resilient is inherent in the DNA because you can't
Mhm.
survive without it. But the
Yeah.
farther you get away generationally from restriction to abundance, resilience begins to decline.
Mhm.
And as resilience begins to decline, you start to see a rise in mental wellness or mental illness uh, that are directly correlated to a lack of resilience. And I think those things are mapped, they're correlated for sure.
Sure. Yeah. And you made me think my grandfather was a doctor for the US Army during World War II. He retired as captain.
Right.
And I mean, when I would ask him, and listen, I'm an executive coach for high ranking officers in the military. And every time I tell them this story, they're like, yeah, that didn't happen. And I know it didn't. He made this story up because he didn't want to talk about the trauma. But anytime I asked him what would happen, he would say, we hid on a bluff in Normandy over the Japanese camp. And when they fell asleep, we blew up helium balloons and tied a grenade to one end, floated it over and blew them up. That never happened. That literally never happened. But it was his way of covering up the pain, because they didn't want to relive that because of the PTSD, but they were, while every generation has its problems, they really were the most resilient. And I remember my grandmother, his wife, would say foil, because it was a throwback to when they did ration and they did save things. And I think while we all have issues, and I'm not, downplaying that, I think we do all live a soft life because resilience really does teach you who you are. I mean, I did a whole TED talk on how I went through 3 sexual assaults in college within 2 months of each other, and how, while that is horrific and I would never want to go through it again, I mean, I survived the worst and I'm still here, so throw it at me because I'm probably going to survive it. Which kind of brings me to my next question, because I find that people can resonate more with your failures than they do with your successes. And you've been wildly successful. But there have to have been some missteps in your career. So would you be willing to share, like, what was your biggest, most painful failure and how did you recover from that?
Yeah, I mean, listen, by the way, before I answer the question, one thing I did want to mention is before we leave the topic of
Sure.
resilience,
Yeah.
I often get asked, so my family's Jewish and my family are both survivors and not survivors of the Holocaust. And we lost at least 3/4 of our family on both sides. And you often get asked, I think, or I think these questions are earnest, meaning, why do you hear so much about the Holocaust? Like, why is there so much conversation about it? Why are there so many movies about it? And there are 2 answers to that question. One answer is that in the grand scheme of genocide in history, it is unlike anything you've ever seen before. There is literally no modern map for anything that occurred in the Holocaust that occurred in other genocides. Not to weigh one as worse or the other, they're
Right.
just very
Right.
different. And
Yes.
what made the Holocaust unique were a bunch of components that made it worth studying, much in the way the uniqueness of other genocides make it worth studying. But this was particularly unique in the way it was executed. But secondarily, the reason that people talk about it so much is because it is a living experiment with people that are still alive today about how you take the absolute worst moment in humanity, the lowest ebb in a possible human's life, not just war and not just, this is human experimentation, separation from family, social experimentation, starvation, slavery. I mean, take everything bad in a bucket and then talk to someone who is still alive to speak about those events. And I think that if you really want to talk about resilience, one of the greatest lessons you can learn is speaking to Holocaust survivors that are still alive today before, because many of them are now in their late 80s and 90s before they pass away, because it is the ultimate testament to both those that were resilient and survived and those that just, even though they survived the war and survived the Holocaust, could not turn their ships right again. And when you look at both of those scenarios, you see really unbelievable stories of resilience. And I think it's very valuable to look at those case studies and those people today before they pass away. But because I don't think there's no better human case study of the story of resilience than people that came out of the Holocaust, if you understand it.
I do, yeah. And, I grew up in South Florida, about an hour north of Miami, where there's a vibrant Jewish community, and my family is Italian. And I feel like Italian mothers and Jewish mothers are just like a jump from each other. And fortunately, I had the opportunity to speak to a lot of Holocaust survivors. And you're right. I mean, I'm a testament to that, everything you just said. And I keep thinking as I was listening to you, I think about that Viktor Frankl quote from A Man's Search for Meaning, between stimulus and response, there is a space, and that space is our power to choose our response. And in that response lies our growth and freedom. And really, the Holocaust survivors that I had the good fortune of speaking to were surprisingly positive, really about the future. And I think seeing the worst of humanity really makes you can go one of two ways. You can go the dark way or the way of the light, which is what I had the good fortune of experiencing from them. And I'm grateful that I was able to witness that and bear witness to their journeys in that small way. And also, let me say, I'm very sorry for your loss. I mean, studying generational trauma, you can see that play out, especially when it's not resolved. But
and I don't listen. I want to answer you. I appreciate it, and I want to answer your question because you asked me about my own failure. But I do feel like we are in a time-limited scenario where the greatest case study in resilience is still available to be done. And the story is still being told and recorded. And there's lots of information at the Shoah Foundation and stuff where if you're really a student of resilience and you're really interested in that, there is very few better case studies than that, just because of the unique nature of the event and how it happened. But to answer your question, I say this to people all the time about failure. I fail constantly. And I don't like when I think now entrepreneurs say that because they think it's fashionable to say it. I'm saying because it's true. I fail multiple times a day. I make the wrong decisions. I bring in the wrong people. I focus on something I shouldn't focus on. Failure is emblazoned in my daily schedule. I do it all day long. And other times, sometimes it hurts and gets a bit more under your skin more than it does other times, especially when the impact of that failure impacts other people and impacts other people's lives. It's obviously a little bit more frustrating. But I think for me, there's no one colossal failure that stood out, because for me, my life is a trail of failures and regrets. I always hate when people say, "Oh, I've lived my life and I have no regrets." Well, you're just a liar. If you haven't lived life with regrets, then you're not paying attention, or you're not genuine, or you're not making real decisions. I mean, I can think of 100 regrets that I have that are big ones, that decisions I should have made differently. And so to pinpoint one particular one, I think would be difficult. I mean, one of the biggest, So I'm choosing to think of this as regret rather than failure, because
Okay.
failure is, to me, much more tactical.
Mhm.
And there's lots of examples of times when I've made just stupid, shitty decisions and failed at something.
Yeah.
But regret is a much more painful and long-lasting emotion. And so I have tons of them. For example, one of my greatest regrets is that I didn't serve in the Israeli military. I don't talk about it very often. It's not like, but it's something that eats away at me every day, that like I should have done and left high school and gone and done service for 2 years. And I think I would have, there's a piece of me that feels incomplete because I didn't do it.
Interesting.
And that was no one's decision but my own, really. I could have done it if I wanted to, but I just got caught up in the treadmill that is university and law school. And, so that's a big regret. And I think failure and regret and understanding the difference between those two things is really important, because one is a tactical outcome. The other is an emotional response. And I have lots of failure that I have no regret about, and lots of failure that I have regret about.
Yeah.
And so
that's really powerful.
I think it's just the question of how you emotionally weight failure. So when you talk about one of the great illnesses that's plaguing American entrepreneurship is this discussion where people are just not honest. Let me take a step back. It's interesting in the entrepreneurial circles in the United States, it's starting to replicate the polarization of general society in the United States. So you have the entrepreneurs who, when you ask them, how's it going? They're like, we're killing it. It's unbelievable. Everything's unbelievable, even though I know it's not. And whenever somebody says to me, "Oh, we're killing it," it's like I tune off instantly. I know this person's not being real, and I don't want to hear it, and I don't care.
Yeah.
And the opposite is true, where you have a lot of entrepreneurs that are too connected and wallowing in negative emotions, where they're over exaggerating it's lonely at the top, and mental illness is more prevalent amidst the entrepreneurial community, and then they're too weighted in one of those two camps. And as always, things are gray and confusing. So I think for me, I care and want to associate with people that are entrepreneurs that are intellectually and emotionally honest. So when an investor asks me how things are going, they are never ever going to get an answer from me that like, we're killing it. They're going to get a balanced answer. Here's the good stuff. Here's the bad stuff. And here's the stuff we're fixing, and here's how we're dealing with the bad stuff. And that, I think, is when you think about failure, that's, I think, the distinction is failure is part of your toolkit. It's part of your everyday. Regret in association to that failure is the question that you always haunt. You haunt yourself with that, and whether or not you regret that failure. And so I have lots of failure that I regret. Lots. I mean, on a personal front, but there's no one, other than what I said about the Israeli military, where I feel like it's a consistent eating away at me. The only other thing I would say, and I'm sure other entrepreneurs have experienced the same thing, I think one of the regrets attached to failure that I have is decisions made around timing. Part of the art of doing any entrepreneurial venture is understanding timing. It's understanding how to get in and how to get out. And it's such a hard skill set. So much of it is luck, and so much of it is just, I always talk to people about Zoom, the very vehicle we're on today. There was nothing unique about Zoom or that interesting about it. There was Skype and lots of other video conferencing systems. And as COVID kicked in, obviously they were in the right place at the right time, and it just ballooned and became a household brand. And now we'll see, how the company takes advantage of that. But could you have ever planned for that? No. And you look at other companies that had offers to sell and didn't, and then the company declined and they lost the market value. So to me, it's always about timing. It's understanding and having the foresight to know when to make decisions that you feel like you're on the right side of history and the right side of time.
Yeah, thank you for all that. I can't tell you how many entrepreneurs that I speak to, and we're, our team is small but mighty, and they, we fail all the time. I mean, it's, and usually my question after that is, what do we learn from it? And what are we not going to replicate again? And so thank you for being honest, because I can't tell you how many times I hear some entrepreneur telling me they just hiked Mount Everest and their business is on fire and they're killing it. And it's like, really, are you? Because at the end of the day, we're all failing and we're all succeeding at the same time. Like you said, it's dumpster fires and, I don't know, confetti. So
Yeah.
that's part of the entrepreneurial lifestyle. And you're right about the timing as well. What's your favorite part of the work you do? Like what really lights you up inside?
For me, there's probably a couple things. One is I don't like being confined to a routine or confined to having to wear a certain kind of clothes, or like, I will not wear a suit ever again. Like when I left the practice of law, the sign for me of success in my life was I wear what I want at whatever meeting. Like, I do a lot of public speaking and stuff, and I've spoken at the United Nations and the G8. Yeah, I spoke at the G8, and I was in a t-shirt and jeans, and that's all I ever wear. And it's stupid, but for me, it was a sign of I'm in control of my own destiny in my own life. And I think for me, that was super important, because so one of my favorite things is just knowing in my gut that I am the master of my own domain and my own choices. And that's super important to me. Freedom, not just financial freedom, but just freedom generally, is a huge driver for me. It's a massive driver for me.
Yeah.
And I think the other part of it that I really like is I am most useful in being able to identify opportunities at the right time. So I get excited when I can identify a market opportunity that is timed well, meaning like, I feel like it's easy to say in 20 years, this is going to be something interesting, or this is going to be a market opportunity. But I like the idea of being able to look around corners and find things that are interesting opportunities that will inevitably be exitable companies, and doing that on a regular basis. But I'm not the kind of person, I'm not the guy you want in the business when it's 50 million in revenue and you need adults in the room at that point, which I am not. So I'm much better at identifying. We talked about the shower head earlier.
Yeah.
That was an example of us identifying a real, that business, the business called Hi, H-A-I. And it was a moment in time where we looked at trending that was going on in the home during COVID, and looked at data around the importance of that experience to people, but also the impact of the environment. We are going to run out of water on this planet long before we burn up. And after agriculture, you and I are the biggest abusers of water. And one of our biggest abuses in the home, if not the largest inside the home, is your shower. And so when we looked at all of that, just piecing that opportunity together is the stuff that I love. Like taking something from nothing and putting together a strategy in a business, knowing that you've got it at the right time, or at least you feel like you've got it at the right time. That's the stuff that I love.
Yeah.
The rest of it is part of the price you pay for the privilege of doing that.
Yeah, I agree. So if you could go back to your very first business that you started as an entrepreneur after being a lawyer, what advice would you give yourself sitting in the seat today, looking backward?
So this is a conversation I have with young entrepreneurs all the time. I think the best advice that you can give a young entrepreneur is that no one talks about. Where people fail in their entrepreneurial journey is their inability to map the desired outcome in their personal lives to the style and type of business that they're building.
Yes.
And the reason, so if you took the Gen Pop of entrepreneurs, the failure rate is 85 to 90%. But if you looked at the success rate or failure rate in the immigrant community, it's significantly better. Like failure rate is much lower in immigrant-run early stage businesses. And in that, I'm talking about from a Subway franchisee to running a dry cleaning store to the person building a software company, you know, or a startup, anyone in that universe. Although I do think they are different. I think there is something very different between owning a small business and being an entrepreneur. They're very different things.
Right.
However, the success rate in immigrant-run small businesses is way higher than in the general population. And I believe the reason is because when you ask an immigrant to this country or anywhere in the world why they're doing it, why do they have the dry cleaning store, why did they start a Subway franchise? Generally, you're going to get three answers. The first answer is because they were unemployable or had difficulty getting employment. But the two biggest drivers are they wanted a roof over their family's head and they wanted to educate their children.
Yep.
And when the dumpster fires happen and the inevitable shit hits the fan, the sturdiness of connecting the reason you're doing that as a business to the life outcomes allows you to stay much more grounded and much more resilient around why you're doing this every day. Because I'm paying for my kids' education, I'm putting a roof over their head, and I was a doctor in, you know, Jordan, and I came here and I don't want to be a janitor. I want to do my own stuff. And I think at the end of the day, the more people that can connect the life questions about how they want to live their life to the kind of business they're building, the more success they'll have. So do I want children? How much do I want to be traveling? Do I want people reporting to me? How much money do I really need to be happy? Because there is a massive law of diminishing return on money. You know, once you hit a certain cliff for each individual, that every dollar becomes a burden after that.
Right.
And so if you can honestly answer those questions, and sometimes you don't know the answers, but if you can at least be consistently thinking about them, you're going to have a much more successful entrepreneurial journey than someone who doesn't answer those questions.
Yeah. And I agree with you. As a coach, one of the things I always connect my people with is what's your why, right? What's your purpose? Because when things get rocky in life, whether you're an entrepreneur or high-ranking officer in the military, you need to have that sturdy foundation of something bigger than yourself, whether it's putting a roof over your family's heads, educating your children. And you're right. I mean, you're exactly right. So one last question, then we're going to go into rapid fire, which are more fun questions. But what has been your favorite launch through Caravan? Are you able to talk about that?
You know, it's kind of like asking to tell you your favorite kid.
Yeah, right.
Look, I would say, just because we already talked about it, let me continue on with the analogy with Todd, just because it's
right.
I was very involved in the day-to-day and still am. I think that was an incredible experience in taking something to market that was, I mean, I'll give you an example. We got interested in the shower market because when you ask, if I give you a list and said, tell me your most important self-care tools in the home, and shower was not on that list, you wouldn't think to put shower on it. But the minute I put shower on it, 87% of the time, it would be your number one or number two choice.
Yeah.
And then when you start to look at why there's been no innovation in that space, one of the key insights is there's no innovation because there's no electricity in there. And because there's no electricity in there, there's only so much you can do with mechanical engineering to be able to make that interesting. And so we literally took that whole analysis and we produced a company that is the only appliance in your home that makes its own energy. We basically turn your shower into a teeny tiny Hoover Dam that takes the power of the water, stores that in a turbine, the energy it creates in a turbine in a battery, and we use that to power Bluetooth and Wi-Fi. Why? Because we can inevitably use that data to, one, make your experience better, and two, more importantly, to cut your water resource usage in a way that makes your experience 10 times better, but allows you to cut back. Like, I know if I put one of our units in your home, I'll reduce your water usage by 34% and your electrical usage by at least 22%. And we do that all through behavioral training. And so that launch was incredible. And inevitably what we'll do with that, I mean, I can't say too much about it, but there's going to be, we are going to make very good use of the water and the energy you're saving. And there's a much bigger societal plan behind High in that business. And so that was a great launch where we could do something great for you and great for the planet at the same time, but also change the way an entire industry worked.
Yeah. I mean, that when I read about it, I was like, how do I not know about this? And I mean, one of my favorite things to do is shower as self-care, you know. I mean, I have an emotionally laborious job, and one of the things I'll do at the end of the day is just shower the day off. So I love that. And thank you for sharing. And I have literally loved this conversation. It's been very enlightening and hopeful. And I really appreciate your time, but I always like to ask these 4 questions. So I hope you'll indulge me just a little bit longer.
Sure.
So what is your favorite comfort food?
For sure. My mother makes this Jewish thing called kamishbroit, which is it's kind of like a Jewish biscotti. That and matzo ball soup. Those would be my 2.
Okay, so I understand, you know, because we have a lot of Jewish friends, and we just went to our first Passover dinner, that there are 2 theories about matzo balls. One that where it sinks and one where it floats. Which is your favorite?
I'm a sinker.
Okay, why?
I don't like the floaties. I like the hard, dense, sinking matzo balls. Yeah. The great sinker floater debate. Yeah.
Yes, I know. I didn't realize it was a whole thing, but it is. Okay.
Yeah.
What books are on your nightstand?
Surprisingly, not a lot. I mean, one of the downfalls of the internet in my life is it has made my attention span so short that if it's longer than 20 pages, I don't read it anymore. So I read a lot of academic journals and a lot of academic articles.
Okay.
I never, ever enjoyed reading fiction. It was just not, if I wanted escapism, I wanted to watch it, not read it. So 90% of my reading is academic journals and economic debates on recessionary and stagflation. And so I tend to read more of that. So my reading pile is predominantly academic journals that tie to macroeconomics and sales theory and financial stuff. So I'm a little bit boring that way.
No, that's fine. That's very, you know, illuminating. So what songs are on your playlist?
Interesting question. I tend to be a little bit nostalgic in my music these days. So I grew up in love with a band called The Jam, which was a band from the 70s in Britain, and listening to a lot of that. And then I would say more modern stuff. I'm a very big fan of a band called Manchester Orchestra, who I'm a big fan of, and Sufjan Stevens and Iron Wine. And I like a bit more of the Americana stuff, even though I'm Canadian.
I love that. I love that. Okay, last question. What are you most grateful for in this moment right now?
You know, I would say, hard question to answer, obviously, but I would say I feel very lucky to be alive in a moment where I get to see the beginnings of a true technological evolution.
Yeah.
I think, actually, I would say 2 things. One, I feel very fortunate to be alive historically in a moment where the state of Israel exists. And because I don't know that it will be there forever. And so having been able to have been alive in a moment where you can witness it and experience it, for me, is very special. And I would say very grateful for being around at a time when you are starting to see real technological evolution and real change, and being able to experience the rise of electric vehicles and autonomous vehicles and conversational and generational AI, and all of that stuff is just, to me, super interesting. And then thirdly is I'm super grateful for my family and friends and my better half, Sarah, and just the ability to share those things with people that you care about. And I think those are kind of the 3 things that I probably feel the most grateful for.
Thank you so much. And thank you to the audience for listening. It's our intention on Hidden Human to inspire you to go out and have authentic, real conversations to deepen the connections in your life. Thank you so much, Leonard. Thank you to the audience, and make it a great day.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
You've been listening to The Hidden Human, the stories behind the business leader. If you've enjoyed the episode, please subscribe to the podcast on iTunes. To learn more about Kelly and the services she provides, visit youloudandclear.com. Thanks so much for listening, and we'll be back soon with a new episode.